This is not just a science story. This is a personal story. For me, it was late in 2017, and I was living alone in a rented condominium. My kids grew up, they were off to college. I got to see them on campus, which was great. My wife wanted a divorce, so we'd separated. And I'm telling you this because now you understand the mood that I was in when I got this test result. I opened up my computer, and prostate-specific antigen jumped off my lab report. I didn't know what prostate-specific antigen was. This is the PSA test. And if you are a sedentary college professor in your early 50s like I was, then it's not surprising to have a prostate problem. The PSA indicates that the subject's prostate is inflamed. It is associated with an increased risk of prostate cancer, but it's not definitive. But I didn't know any of that at the time. So, I go online, and I go to WebMD or Mayo Clinic or any one of these sites, and it takes like 7 minutes for me to become convinced that I'm gonna die of prostate cancer. Because you can't spend time on these websites without the catastrophic thoughts of everything that is probably wrong with you going through your mind. For me, I had to think about what my options were and how should I approach this, because everything online said I'm supposed to go see a urologist, which I didn't want to do. Everything online says I'm supposed to have a prostate exam. And then if the prostate exam is consistent and shows inflammation, like everybody has, then I'm supposed to get a biopsy. And then the biopsy comes back, they sample like 16 different tissue samples out of your prostate, and if it comes back with too many positives, and the rate of false positive is very high, then the urologist will recommend a prostatectomy. After prostatectomy, it's probably a lifetime of erectile dysfunction. So this is the mood that I'm in. I'm looking at my test reports and I'm reading WebMD and I'm thinking, what woman is ever gonna love me if I can't get a hard-on ever again? I said, I am not doing it. I'm not gonna go to the urologist. I'm not going through this sequence of events. I'm talking to other men first. There's got to be other men who have had this problem. And so I started talking to some of my friends, some older, some younger. And this thread from Mark Sisson, whom I don't know, but he was kind enough to post on Twitter, this thread summarizes it all. Some of the guys told me that their biopsy was the most painful thing that ever happened to them. Sisson said he was infected. He had sepsis. He was on the edge of death. He spent 3 days in the hospital taking antibiotics to bring him back. I said, there's no way I'm letting anybody touch me. I'm gonna have a different approach. I'm gonna use a ketogenic diet and ice baths. This is when I started getting really serious about ice baths. Every single day, I got into my Sears Kenmore chest freezer. There was no such thing in Morosco at the time. And I got in there because I was scared. And then I got out, and I was cold. And I had to do some jumping jacks, or push-ups, or walk to class, whatever I was gonna do to re-warm. It was 4 months later when I had the guts to retest my PSA, and it worked. I brought it down from 7 to 1.8. But I had to keep monitoring. It took me months to get of monitoring my PSA, to get the courage to actually go see a urologist. This was the report that I brought him. The PSA had come down to 1.5. But when you check the box for like the male health panel, one of the things that the lab report is gonna include is testosterone. And this time, what jumped off the lab report was 1180 nanograms per deciliter, which is unheard of for a fat guy in his 50s. The reference range only goes up to 1100. I was literally off the charts. And so I said, okay, great. I'll go to the urologist now. I'm probably gonna get a big pat on the back and a congratulations. When I brought him this report, he didn't care about my PSA. He didn't care that I was ever elevated. He just looked at my testosterone and he thought, because he was about my age, he thought, this guy's juicy. He told me, I want one more test. That test was for luteinizing hormone. I didn't know what luteinizing hormone was, but urologists believe that elevated testosterone will increase the risk of prostate cancer. And he wanted to know my luteinizing hormone because it is luteinizing hormone that signals the testes to produce testosterone. If my T levels were high and luteinizing hormone were low, he'd know that I was like juicing. And then he would have counseled me to get off the exogenous testosterone lest I give myself a prostate problem. This is where my luteinizing hormone came back. 8.9, off the charts. He knew I was natural, and he never talked to me again. I mean, it wasn't like he called me up and said, oh, what are you doing? You know, oh, I should change my practice. And it was naive of me to think that anything that I would do might change the practice of urology or the treatment of prostate. The fact is that the way men are treated for inflamed prostate in this country is hurting men. But I had to understand what was happening to me. I went to the library because I'm a scientist, because I'm a faculty member. I found this 1991 study. This is Sakamoto et al. And they did something that nobody has ever done. The first thing they did was they took a bunch of young men, they put them on an exercise bike, and then they used the ice bath to recover from the exercise like everybody, and they noticed that luteinizing hormone and testosterone went down. So that's common. But then they reversed the order. They said, what if we do the cold before we do the exercise bike? Luteinizing hormone and testosterone went up. I wrote a little article about it that nobody read. But it was important to me to understand this process of what happened to my testosterone when I was doing ice baths for my prostate. The article went up on the Morozko Forge website because after this, we knew that we had to make ice baths. We had to offer them to the world. Nobody read it until Joe Rogan put it out on his podcast. This is December 2022, and I'm in Iceland with Michael Lowe from Simply 03 because we're going to see the Northern Lights and we're going to get together and have fun with a bunch of biohacker people. And Rogan, unbeknownst to me, reads out a post based on my article to David Goggins on his podcast. You can imagine what happened. People started sending me lab reports from all over the world. This is a 66-year-old guy in Massachusetts who saw Rogan, found my article, started my protocol. It didn't take him long to raise his testosterone up almost as high as mine. And he wasn't even doing anything but jumping in the pond and then having a brisk soccer mom walk home. The problem is that if my urologist and all the other medical doctors who think elevated testosterone will increase prostate cancer risk, if they're right, then I'm doing a great disservice to other men by saying, hey, you can use cold plunge, you can get your testosterone up. So I needed to know. Brigham Bueller is the one who set me straight. Brigham, like Joe, is a customer. He went on the Joe Rogan podcast and he talked about this phenomenon. It turns out that high testosterone protects against prostate cancer. So my friends who were put on testosterone suppression as a precautionary measure against prostate cancer were actually being harmed by their medical doctor's advice. I started doing more in-depth case studies. Women started writing to me and saying, hey, I saw your video, I started doing cold plunge, I got my testosterone measured. It turns out that cold plunge has an even more important effect in women than it does in men. In men, most of the testosterone by far is produced in the testes, but in women, only 25% of the testosterone is produced in the ovaries. The rest is in the skin cells, the fat cells, and the adrenal glands. And the best thing you can do to stimulate activity in the skin, fat, and adrenal glands is a cold plunge. So there are 2 women in the book and in these documented case studies. All of these people I've interviewed, all of these people I have lab reports on, showing how cold plunge therapy has boosted their testosterone. But there's a key difference. Men must exercise, just like in the Sakamoto study. Men must exercise after the cold, women don't have to. There's one study of women and testosterone, and it shows that just cold stimulation, one hand in a bowl of ice water, will create a boost in salivary testosterone in women. How does that happen? Testosterone is synthesized from cholesterol. And most people don't know this, but you can see the chemical structure of the two molecules and how cholesterol can be easily converted to testosterone. And where does that happen? On the inner mitochondrial membrane. This is where testosterone synthesis originates. If your mitochondria aren't in good shape, your testosterone will not be in good shape, because there has to be a transport process of the cholesterol through the cell membrane, through the outer membrane of the mitochondria, and into the inner membrane where this reaction is first originated. Your mitochondrial health is essential to your sex function and your sex health. And there is nothing in the world better than cold exposure to rejuvenate your mitochondria. There's some pretty broad implications of this. For example, it is the endothelial cells inside the walls of the blood vessels that produce nitric oxide to induce vasodilation. Medical doctors didn't think that it was mitochondria responsible for that vasodilation, and now we know it is. And so vasodilation, being essential for filling the blood with penis and maintaining an erection, turns out that when you boost your mitochondria, you can also resolve erectile dysfunction. Women get a fertility boost, and everybody gets a boost in their libido as their testosterone goes up. A couple of more things happen in the cold plunge. When you cold plunge with your partner, you release oxytocin, you release vasopressin, you create a bonding romantic attraction to your partner. And women who cold plunge while they're pregnant experience better birth outcomes. So in the last minutes of my presentation, I want to go over some of the misconceptions that exist around testosterone right now. One of them is this exercise thing. If you do the ice bath after your workout, you will suppress testosterone levels. You will suppress what's called hypertrophy. You will suppress muscle growth. And there are too many people who are still doing the ice bath after their workout. However, if you do the ice bath before your workout, you will get a boost in exercise performance, you will get a boost in testosterone, and you will get a boost in hypertrophy. And so we've got a number of articles and good evidence suggesting stop doing the ice bath after exercise, and don't believe the people on social media who are saying, well, the ice bath was going to cut your gains, because they're doing the ice bath wrong. Here's some more misconceptions. This is Mark Megna. He's a former professional football player. He's now a bodybuilder. You can see these models absolutely shredded. And when this photo was taken, his total testosterone was down in the 200s. He didn't get it back up to the 800s until he started cold plunging before his exercise. Exercise alone is insufficient to ensure adequate testosterone levels. And that's because you can have great body composition and still have poor mitochondria. Some people say, well, you should take vitamin D supplements because that's going to boost your testosterone. It does not. Vitamin D and testosterone are both synthesized from cholesterol. They are correlated, but they are not causal. And so vitamin D is often low when testosterone is low, but boosting your vitamin D will not boost your testosterone. You know what will? Zinc, magnesium, and boron. Your mitochondria rely upon these micronutrients to affect all of the metabolic reactions. They rely on magnesium, they rely on zinc, and in the case of testosterone, they rely on boron. When you ice bath, you use these micronutrients. You're stimulating the mitochondrial activity, and you're using up stores of these minerals inside your body. They must be replenished for you to heal your mitochondria. Testosterone research has a big problem. Medical research in general has this problem. The way it works is they'll get a cohort of subjects, you know, a couple of dozen people, and they'll say, okay, we're going to feed them tonkat alai, or we're going to feed them ashwagandha, or we're going to feed them D-aspartic acid. And then we're going to come back a week later, and we're going to see whether their testosterone levels went up. The problem with this is that there's no appreciation of the mechanisms by which those herbs and supplements might boost testosterone. That mechanism is mitochondrial, and more is not necessarily better. So if one research team gets a signal, they do a little D-aspartic acid, and testosterone levels go up in their cohort, there'll be another research team that says, we should do twice the dose for 3 times as long. We'll get a better signal. That is not the case. If you have too little stimulus of your mitochondria, then your mitochondria suffer. If you have too much, your mitochondria will suffer. There is an optimum in the middle called eustress compared with distress, where the stress you induce on your body makes your body stronger. And so what's going on in medical research is, without an appreciation of the mechanisms by which testosterone is synthesized and metabolized, people are doing really poor work that then gets amplified on social media to say, well, this works and this doesn't work. But the dose makes the response. Finally, some people are starting to listen. You probably recognize some of these faces: Aaron Rodgers, Joe Rogan, Andrew Huberman. They're doing the pre-cooling. They have an appreciation of the role of mitochondria and testosterone. But it's not enough, people. This is Jay Bhattacharya. He's now the director of the National Institute of Health. He and I became friends during the COVID lockdowns because we were both faculty who were publishing work against the lockdown, saying they're pointless and harmful. And we found each other when I drove up to Menlo Park, which is right close to Stanford. And we commiserated for several years. When I published my book, of course, I gave Jay a copy. This is months ago. He said, "Tom, there are too many scientific footnotes in here. Nobody's ever going to read it." And he's probably right. There are 450 scientific footnotes in my Uncommon Cold book because it is based in the science. Now, Jay is the director of the NIH, and he says he wants to make America healthy again. He's probably not the best, poster child. Probably you're thinking Robert Kennedy. But because Jay is a faculty member and he funds research, he's very important to me. When he says that he wants to refocus the NIH on chronic illness, I'm thinking that's great. I'm going to start submitting grants to the NIH to study the relationship between cold plunge and type 2 diabetes, cold plunge and testosterone, cold plunge and opioid addiction. But I cannot wait for NIH funding. It will take years for the results of my clinical trials to be accepted by the people in the scientific community. And I don't think your customers are waiting either. As much as I appreciate what Jay is now doing, I don't want you to wait for him. I think the only way we make America healthy again is when Americans decide to make themselves healthy again. Your best customers aren't going to sit around waiting for my faculty friends to figure it out either. The question for you is, what will you do as business people? Are you going to stay ahead of your customers? Are you going to keep them ahead of the curve? And are you going to help them make themselves healthy again too? Thanks for giving me a half hour of your time. Kelly, I don't know if we have room for a question, but there's somebody with a hand up, and so I feel like we should take it.
Hi, I'm just curious if the cold plunge is equal to the cryo chambers.
They are not equal. I did a slide on this last year from this stage. They both stimulate mitochondria, and they are both good for the metabolism, but they are different. There are some people who don't want to get wet. And so I understand, do a cryo chamber. If you're going around and you're seeing the booths, there are a number of cryo chambers where you can get cold. There's even a dry, cold plunge bed. And we brought an ice bath, which kind of requires a bathing suit. So some people don't want to get wet, and you get a lot of the good metabolic benefits out of any sort of deliberate cold exposure. But then there are some things that happen in the ice bath that cannot happen in the cryo chamber. The cryo chamber is very cold. It could result in frostbite or frost nip, for example. Cold won't do that. The cold will also ground you because the water is a source of electrons when your ice bath, like Morozko is grounded. You can get some magnesium benefit when you put Epsom salt in the water, for example. You get transdermal absorption of magnesium. So they're different. If your preference is to stay dry, then definitely go cryo chamber. More hands.
For some of those that didn't find ice bath before they went to the urologist and got on steroid treatments, what would ice baths do for those at that point? Asking for a friend.
We have two cases of men in their 40s. One is a disabled Army veteran, PTSD, traumatic brain injury, low T. He started TRT because testosterone is associated with mood. When a man's testosterone is low. He's got no energy, he's got no motivation, and in his case, with PTSD, suicidal thoughts kept intruding upon his everyday existence. He couldn't hold a job. He went to the doctor. The doctor said, we're gonna get your testosterone up. Now that doesn't do anything for his brain injury, but it's keeping him alive. He read the articles. He turns out he's an archer. And he was in Austin, Texas at his favorite archery shop. In walks Joe Rogan. And they're looking at arrows or something, whatever archers do. Joe talks to him for 45 minutes and he says, you gotta get in the ice bath. So he set himself up with a garbage bin and, you know, ice and things like that. That helped his brain. His testosterone levels when he was on TRT were in the 800s, which is very healthy. His testosterone levels when he did daily ice baths went up to 1,400. And I'm gonna say, so, you know, are you gonna get off the TRT now? And he's like, no way. I am never going back to the way that I felt when I was too low, and I don't want to take that chance again. The problem with TRT is that once you're on it, you are on it for life. My son is a type 1 diabetic, and thank God for genetically engineered human insulin, because he would not be alive if he wasn't injecting himself with insulin. His pancreas doesn't make insulin anymore. When you go on TRT, your testicles lose the capacity to make your own testosterone. And the longer you're on it, the more diminished, the more atrophied your testicles become. And so, like a type 1 diabetic, you become dependent upon the exogenous testosterone. And thank God for that. Because when a man is in such a low state that he's thinking, despite the fact that he has a wife and kids, that he's thinking of taking his own life, then I want a hormone that will bring him back to life. However, I caution men who are not so desperate that TRT should be a lesser resort. Cold plunge and metabolic interventions, get your magnesium right, get your zinc right, they should be the first resort because they don't come with those other adverse side effects.
Hi, Tom. Great presentation.
Hey, thanks.
And it's been awesome following your work over the years. Question for you, Tom, on total testosterone as a biomarker versus, for example, free. And are there times when the total number is not telling the right story or the full story? Not directly related to cold, but in the same general topic that we're on now. I just wondered what you've come across around that.
You, Dave, you probably know that testosterone, most of it is bound up with something called, if I'm getting the acronym right, sex hormone binding globulin. It's just waiting there. It's not active. It's not doing anything in your body. It's just waiting there for when your body needs it so that it can be released. It is free testosterone that is active inside your body. And so there's this big debate. And for the most part, that debate exists in the bodybuilding world. I talked to Mark Bell. He had me on the podcast. And Mark Bell is most famous for injecting levels of testosterone that you wouldn't even give a racehorse. You know, he has experimented with extreme testosterone therapy. And if you're in that bodybuilding world, you really want the free to boost so that you can get the anabolic gains. But outside bodybuilding, it is total testosterone that is a good measure of your metabolic health. Your body will release it when you need it. And in this respect, I agree with Dan Garner. He and I met in Dallas. We were at Parker University, the Chiropractic Institute of Higher Learning here. And he said, total testosterone is the way to go. I think he and I are on the same page. When your body needs it, it will be released. Thank you, Kelly, and thank you for all these questions. I'm going to be around at the booth, so there are a couple of more hands, and you're welcome to come see me there. We have some books if you'd like to buy one, and of course, I'll take more questions.